Am I wrong for cutting off my mom after learning she's actually my grandmother? I've always believed my family was simple and straightforward. My mom, Lisa, raised me as a single parent. She always told me my dad wasn't in the picture and that she had made countless sacrifices to give me a good life. I admired her for it. Who wouldn't? She worked tirelessly, never letting me feel like I was missing out, even though it was just the two of us. Growing up, my older sister, Emily, was like a breath of fresh air in our little household. She lived with us for a while when I was a kid, and she was the fun, carefree presence that balanced out my mom's strict but loving demeanor. Emily had a way of making every moment feel special. Silly games, late-night stories, even sneaking me candy when my mom wasn't looking. When Emily moved out around the time I was 12, it felt like a natural part of life. People grow up, leave home, and live their own lives. I missed her, of course, but I figured that's how adult siblings worked. Looking back, I realize how much I trusted everything about my family. I never questioned my mom's stories about her sacrifices or why Emily had such a big role in my life. It all felt normal, comforting even. My mom was the rock, Emily the fun-loving sibling, and me, the lucky daughter who got to grow up in their shadow. It's funny how something as solid as a family can feel so stable, so unshakable. That's how it was for me. For 22 years, I never had a reason to doubt. But life has a way of turning stability into sand. And the moment Emily came back into my life, everything I thought I knew began to slip away. Looking back, my childhood felt like it was out of a storybook. My mom made sure of that. She worked 2 jobs most of the time, yet still managed to show up for every school recital, every birthday party, and every scraped knee. I always saw her as someone who could do it all, unshakable, selfless, and endlessly devoted. Emily was the spark that made everything even better. As my older sister, she brought a playful energy into the house. When she wasn't busy studying or going out with friends, she was with me, building pillow forts in the living room or teaching me silly dances. She wasn't just my sister, she was my best friend. We had a small, cozy apartment. My mom called it humble beginnings, and I thought it was perfect. It didn't matter that the kitchen was too small for all of us to cook together, or that Emily and I shared a room for most of my early years. It felt warm and safe, and my mom was always there to hold everything together. My mom had a way of turning little things into grand gestures. On weekends, she would take us to the park with sandwiches wrapped in tinfoil, calling it a picnic adventure. When we couldn't afford to go to the movies, she'd rent a DVD and make popcorn, pretending our tiny living room was a theater. Emily was always a part of those moments, too. She made me laugh harder than anyone else. She'd wink at me during my mom's serious talks, or whisper jokes that we'd giggle about for hours. Those years were filled with the kind of happiness that felt simple and unbreakable. My mom was the provider, and Emily was the dreamer. Together, they built a world where I felt loved and cared for. Even now, it's hard to reconcile the warmth of those memories with the way everything fell apart. For so long, I thought our family was perfect in its imperfection. How could something so full of love be hiding a secret that would change everything? Things started to change when Emily moved out. I was 12 at the time, old enough to understand that people grow up and leave home, but not old enough to process how it made me feel. It wasn't sudden. She'd been talking about moving into her own place for months, but the day she packed her bags and left, the apartment felt a little emptier. She promised it wouldn't change much. "I'll visit all the time," she said, hugging me tight before she left. And for a while, she did. She'd come by every couple of weeks, bringing snacks, silly gifts, or just herself. We'd catch up, watch our favorite shows, and laugh like nothing had changed. But as time went on, the visits became less frequent. Emily was busy with work, friends, and her own life. At least that's what my mom always told me. "She's an adult now," she'd say with a shrug, as if that explained everything. I missed her, but I accepted it. That's just how life worked, right? Siblings grow up, move out, and drift apart. I still admired her from afar, though. In my eyes, Emily was so cool, independent, confident, and living her life on her own terms. Over time, the gap between us widened. By the time I was in high school, we were practically strangers. She'd pop up for holidays and birthdays, but our once close bond had faded. I figured that was normal. Still, a part of me always wondered why she hadn't stayed closer. Did I do something wrong? Did she not care about me as much as I thought? I buried those feelings, though, because my mom was still there, holding everything together. I never questioned why Emily's absence hurt so much. At least, not until she came back years later and shattered everything I thought I knew. It had been years since Emily and I had a real conversation. We'd see each other at family gatherings, exchange pleasantries, and maybe share a laugh or two, but it wasn't the same. So, when she called out of the blue to say she wanted to visit, I was surprised, and, if I'm honest, a little nervous. She showed up on a Saturday afternoon, carrying a bag of takeout and looking more nervous than I'd ever seen her. At first, I chalked it up to stress. Maybe she was going through something, and this was her way of reaching out. I didn't push, though. We sat in the living room, eating and catching up like old times. But something felt off. Emily wasn't her usual bubbly self. She kept fidgeting with her hands, glancing at me like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. At one point, she laughed at a joke I made, but it sounded forced, like she was trying too hard to act normal. I asked her if everything was okay, and she nodded too quickly. Yeah, just tired, she said, avoiding eye contact. I let it go, not wanting to make her uncomfortable. After we finished eating, she suggested we sit down for coffee. That's when her demeanor shifted entirely. She leaned forward, clasping her hands together, and said, "I need to tell you something, and you're not going to like it." Her words froze me. I thought she was about to tell me something awful. An illness, a financial crisis, maybe even that she was moving far away. But nothing could have prepared me for what she said next. "I'm not your sister," she blurted out, her voice shaking. "I'm your mom." The room went silent. I stared at her, waiting for her to laugh or say it was some kind of strange joke. But the look on her face told me she wasn't joking. And in that moment, it felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. I couldn't speak. The words, "I'm your mom," hung in the air, too big and heavy for me to process. Emily, my carefree, fun-loving older sister, wasn't my sister at all? My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. "No," I finally said, shaking my head. "That's not possible. You're my sister. Mom is my mom." Emily's face crumpled, and she looked like she might cry. "I know it's a lot," she said softly, "but it's the truth. I'm your biological mother. Mom, well, she's actually your grandmother." I couldn't believe it. I refused to believe it. "Prove it," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Part of me thought she'd back down, admit it was some kind of cruel prank. But instead, she reached for her bag and pulled out a small envelope. Inside were photos, old ones from before I was born. There was Emily as a teenager, visibly pregnant, standing awkwardly next to my mom, who looked much younger but just as stern. There were hospital records too, with Emily's name listed as the mother. She pointed to one of the pictures. "This was the day you were born," she said, her voice trembling. "I was 15. Mom, well, your grandmother, said I couldn't raise you. She thought it would ruin my life and yours. She told me the best thing for both of us was for her to step in and raise you as her own." I stared at the evidence in front of me, feeling my world collapse. Emily kept talking, explaining how scared she'd been, how much she'd wanted to keep me, but how my mom had convinced her it was the only way. "I thought I was doing the right thing," she said, tears streaming down her face. "But as you got older, it got harder and harder to pretend. I've wanted to tell you for years, but Mom said it would just hurt you and ruin everything." I couldn't look at her. I couldn't think. My whole life had been a lie, and the two people I trusted most were at the center of it. My stomach churned as I whispered, "Why now?" She looked down, unable to meet my eyes. "Because you deserve to know the truth," she said, "even if it breaks everything." Even with the photos and documents in front of me, it felt impossible to accept. These weren't just pieces of paper. They were fragments of a story I never knew existed. A story that rewrote everything I thought I knew about my life. Emily sat across from me, visibly shaken but determined. She kept pointing to the pictures, explaining the context for each one. "This is me at 15, about 6 months pregnant," she said, tapping on a faded photo of her standing in a backyard. She was holding her stomach, her expression a mix of fear and uncertainty. Beside her was my mom, smiling stiffly as though the picture was an obligation. Another photo showed the two of them in a hospital room. Emily looked pale, exhausted, and far too young to be holding a newborn. But there she was, holding me. "I wanted to keep you," Emily said, her voice thick with emotion. "I fought for it. But Mom said I was being selfish. She said I'd ruin your life if I tried to raise you at my age. She told me this was the only way to give you a stable future." Her words swirled in my mind, but I couldn't focus on them. I kept staring at the photos, willing them to be fake. They weren't. Then there were the documents. Birth records with Emily's name listed as the mother and my grandmother's as the guardian. A hastily written letter from Emily to my mom, pleading for more time with me. It was dated when I was 2 years old. Every piece of evidence was like a weight pressing down on my chest. The people I had loved and trusted most had crafted an elaborate lie and lived it for my entire life. "I thought it was the right thing to do," Emily continued. "But it wasn't. It wasn't fair to you." I didn't respond. I couldn't. My throat felt tight, and my hands trembled as I pushed the photos and papers away. I needed space. I needed air. Nothing about my life felt real anymore. How could I ever trust them, or anyone, again? I don't remember much about the time between Emily's confession and when I confronted my mom. It was a haze of anger, confusion, and disbelief. I couldn't wrap my head around what had happened, or why. But I knew one thing. I needed answers. When I finally sat down with my mom, I barely recognized her. She looked calm, almost detached, as though this was just another conversation. It infuriated me. "Is it true?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "Is Emily my mom?" She didn't flinch. She didn't deny it. She just nodded, her expression unreadable. "Yes," she said. "It's true." That one word sent a wave of rage through me. "How could you lie to me my entire life?" I demanded. "How could you think this was okay?" She sighed, like she was tired of the conversation before it had even begun. "I did what I had to do," she said firmly. "Emily was a child. She couldn't raise you. I stepped in to give you the life you deserved." Her words stung. They weren't an apology. They were a justification. She spoke as though her decision was the only logical option, as though I should be grateful. "You lied to me," I shot back. "You let me believe you were my mom, and you let Emily pretend to be someone she wasn't. Do you even realize what that's done to me?" Her face hardened. "You're upset now, but one day you'll understand. I sacrificed everything for you." I felt like I was talking to a wall. There was no remorse, no acknowledgement of how deeply she had hurt me. Instead, she made me feel like I was the one in the wrong for being angry. I left that conversation more broken than when I had walked in. The person I'd looked up to my entire life didn't seem to care about the damage she'd caused. She only cared about being right. After confronting my mom, or, I guess, my grandmother, I spent days replaying the conversation in my head. Her tone, her words, the way she looked at me like I was ungrateful for even questioning her choices. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Eventually, I decided to try again. Maybe if I approached her differently, she'd open up. I needed to understand why she thought it was okay to rewrite my entire identity without my consent. When I sat down with her, she seemed more defensive this time, as if she'd already prepared for an argument. "You don't understand what it was like back then," she started before I even said a word. "Emily was 15, a child. She couldn't handle being a mother, and I wasn't going to let her throw her life away, or yours. I asked her why she didn't give me a choice, why she decided for everyone else what was best. Her response was cold and calculated. You were a baby. You didn't need choices. You needed stability. And I gave you that. Do you think you'd have had the life you have now if Emily had raised you? She couldn't even take care of herself back then." I tried to argue that I could have grown up knowing the truth, that there were other ways to handle the situation. But she cut me off, her voice sharp. "And what would that have done? Confused you? Made you resent your mother? I did what I had to do to protect you, to make sure you had a chance at a good life. And this is how you thank me?" Her words stung, but what hurt more was the way she seemed completely blind to how much she had hurt me. She didn't see a problem with her actions. To her, this was all about sacrifice and duty. "You should be grateful," she said finally, her voice firm. "I gave you everything." But that was the problem. Her everything came with a lie so big it had shattered everything else. And she couldn't or wouldn't see that. After talking to my mom or grandmother, I felt more lost than ever. Her words echoed in my mind. I gave you everything. But everything felt tainted now, built on a foundation of lies. The one person who could help me make sense of it all was Emily. When I called her, she sounded relieved to hear from me. We agreed to meet at her apartment, a quiet, neutral space where we could finally talk without interruptions or judgment. The moment I walked in, Emily hugged me, holding on like she thought I might pull away. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. Her voice was thick with emotion, but she didn't cry. Not yet. We sat on her couch, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then, finally, she broke the silence. "I never wanted this to happen," she began. "When I got pregnant with you, I was terrified. I didn't know what to do. Mom, well, she took over. She said it was the only way to protect both of us." Her words came fast, tumbling out like she'd been holding them back for years. She told me about the pressure she'd felt at 15, the shame and fear that had consumed her. "I didn't know how to fight her," she admitted. "She was so sure of herself, so persuasive. She said you'd have a better life with her as your mom. And at the time, I believed her. I asked her why she let the lie go on for so long. Why didn't she tell me the truth sooner?" Emily looked down at her hands, twisting her fingers nervously. "I was scared," she said. "Scared of what it would do to you, and scared of Mom. She always said it would ruin everything if you found out." Her voice cracked as she continued. "But it wasn't fair, to you or to me. I've lived with this guilt every single day, and every time I saw you, every time you called me your sister, it killed me. I wanted to tell you so many times, but I didn't know how." Her pain was raw, undeniable. For the first time, I saw the weight she'd been carrying all these years. But even as I felt her heartbreak, I couldn't shake the sense of betrayal. She had her reasons, but they didn't erase the damage. After hearing Emily's side of the story, I felt like I was carrying the weight of two worlds, her pain and my own. For days, I couldn't think about anything else. My head was a storm of questions, doubts, and anger. How could they decide something so monumental without ever considering how it might affect me? I started replaying moments from my childhood, now tinged with suspicion. Every memory with Emily felt like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. The way she doted on me, how she was always around but never took on too much responsibility, it all felt off in hindsight. Even more confusing was my relationship with my mom. She had been my hero, my constant, my entire world. Now, I couldn't separate the love I felt for her from the betrayal of what she'd done. How could someone who claimed to love me so deeply hide something so important from me? I tried journaling, hoping it would help me process everything. Instead, I ended up with pages of angry scribbles and half-finished thoughts. I wanted to forgive them, to believe that they acted out of love, but the hurt ran too deep. Every time I thought about calling Emily or my mom, I stopped myself. What could I even say? How do you begin to reconcile with people who've kept such a massive secret from you? Part of me wanted to scream at them, to make them understand the damage they'd done. Another part of me just wanted to retreat, to pretend none of this had happened. I avoided family gatherings and ignored their calls. It wasn't that I didn't care. It was that I cared too much. Every time my phone buzzed with a message from Emily or my mom, my chest tightened. For the first time in my life, I felt completely untethered. My identity, my family, my sense of self, it was all in question. And no matter how much I tried to piece it back together, it felt like I was staring at a puzzle with half the pieces missing. For weeks, I avoided both Emily and my mom. I couldn't face them. Not yet. Every interaction felt loaded. Every word from them carried the weight of the lie they had lived for so many years. When my mom called, I'd let it go to voicemail. She'd leave messages, her tone a mix of frustration and desperation. "I don't understand why you're acting like this," she said once. "I raised you. I gave you everything. Why are you punishing me for it?" Her words only pushed me further away. Punishment wasn't what I wanted. I just needed space to process what had happened. But she didn't seem to understand that. To her, my anger and confusion were signs of ingratitude, not the natural reaction to having my entire life turned upside down. Emily, on the other hand, was quieter. She texted me occasionally, simple messages like, "I'm here if you want to talk," or "I hope you're okay." Unlike my mom, she wasn't demanding anything from me. But even her gentleness felt overwhelming. Every text was a reminder of the truth I was struggling to accept. I threw myself into work and tried to keep my mind busy, but it didn't help. The silence between us wasn't healing. It was growing heavier with each passing day. I thought about reaching out, but every time I picked up my phone, I felt paralyzed. What could I say? The distance wasn't just physical, it was emotional, mental, and even spiritual. The people I had always turned to in moments of crisis were now the source of my pain. And no matter how much I tried to push it aside, the wound stayed raw. For the first time, I realized that healing might not come from them. It had to come from me. But I didn't know where to start. As the weeks stretched on, the calls from my mom, my grandmother, became relentless. She wasn't just trying to reach me, she was trying to pull me back into the dynamic we'd always had. The problem was, that dynamic didn't exist anymore. Her messages started with concern. "I'm worried about you," she said in one voicemail. "Please call me. We need to talk." But when I didn't respond, her tone shifted. The guilt trips began, and they cut deep. One day, she left a particularly harsh message. "I don't understand why you're acting like this," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me? Do you think Emily would have been able to give you the life I did? You should be thanking me, not treating me like the villain." Hearing those words felt like a punch to the gut. I didn't doubt that she had made sacrifices. I had seen her work tirelessly to provide for us. But her actions, no matter how well-intentioned, didn't erase the betrayal I felt. She called me selfish, ungrateful, and immature in later messages. "You have no idea how hard it was to raise you," she said. "You don't even appreciate the life I gave you. Do you think it was easy for me? I did it for you." The guilt was suffocating. Part of me wanted to believe her, to give in and pretend everything was fine. But another part of me, the part that had been shattered by the truth, couldn't let it go. I wasn't being selfish for feeling hurt. I wasn't ungrateful for questioning the choices she had made. Still, her words stayed with me, replaying in my head when I least expected it. Was I wrong to be angry? Was I being unfair to the woman who had sacrificed so much? I didn't know how to respond. Every time her name flashed on my phone, I felt torn between wanting to defend myself and wanting to disappear. And the longer I stayed silent, the more her guilt-tripping voice echoed in my mind. While my mom bombarded me with guilt and accusations, Emily's approach was the complete opposite. Her texts and voicemails were gentle, almost apologetic. But they carried their own weight, a different kind of pressure that was just as hard to navigate. "Hey," one message read, "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I just want you to know I'm here. I'll wait as long as you need." Another time, she called and left a voicemail. Her voice was soft, cracking slightly as she spoke. "I'm so sorry for everything, for all the years I didn't tell you. I should have been stronger, but I wasn't. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I hope one day you can at least understand why I did what I did." I listened to that message over and over, trying to decipher every emotion behind her words. She sounded sincere, heartbroken even, but it wasn't enough to erase the hurt. Emily didn't try to guilt me or defend herself like my mom did. She just kept asking for a chance to explain, to fix things. Her desperation to make amends was palpable, but it didn't make the situation any easier. If anything, it made it harder. I felt trapped between two impossible choices, shutting her out completely or opening myself up to the pain of confronting everything head-on. Each time I ignored her messages, I felt a pang of guilt. But every time I thought about responding, the resentment bubbled back up. Emily's pleas were a reminder of how much this revelation had upended both of our lives. She was waiting for me to forgive her, to move forward. But I wasn't sure I was ready, or if I ever would be. With every message from my mom or Emily, I found myself spiraling further into doubt and confusion. I couldn't stop replaying my childhood in my head, now seen through a completely different lens. Moments that once felt so warm and genuine now felt tainted, like pieces of a story I no longer trusted. I thought about the nights when my mom tucked me into bed, her voice soft as she reassured me that everything would be okay. Did she feel guilty while saying those words? Did she ever think about the lie she was living? Then there were the times Emily would sneak into my room to whisper jokes or tell me stories when I couldn't sleep. I used to think it was just sisterly bonding, but now I wondered, was that her way of trying to be close to me as my mother? Every memory became a question. Every kind word, every gesture of love. It all felt like part of the act they'd created to keep the truth from me. I even started questioning the family traditions we'd shared. Birthdays, holidays, the little routines that made our home feel special. Were those real, or were they just distractions to keep me from looking too closely? I thought about the times I had asked my mom about my father, and how quickly she'd shut the conversation down. "He's not in the picture," she'd say, her tone final. I never pushed, assuming it was too painful for her to talk about. But now, I wondered if she was just protecting the lie. The deeper I dug into my memories, the more disconnected I felt from them. My past, once a source of comfort and pride, had become a web of uncertainty. What hurt the most was realizing that the two people I trusted the most had decided that I didn't deserve the truth. They'd made choices for me, about me, without ever giving me a voice. And now, even as they begged for my understanding, I couldn't help but wonder, how do you forgive someone for rewriting your entire life? As my thoughts continued to spiral, I realized I needed a fresh perspective. I couldn't untangle the mess on my own, and talking to my mom or Emily felt impossible. So for the first time, I opened up to a close friend about what had happened. I told her everything, the revelation, the lies, the guilt trips, and Emily's pleas for forgiveness. I didn't hold back. By the time I finished, I was shaking, unsure of how she would react. She stared at me for a moment, wide-eyed, before finally saying, "I can't even imagine what you're going through. That's a lot. Her sympathy was comforting, but it didn't provide the clarity I'd been hoping for. When I asked her what she thought I should do, she hesitated. "I think you have every right to feel hurt," she said carefully. "But maybe they really thought they were doing the right thing at the time. Doesn't mean it was right, though." I also turned to the internet, posting anonymously in a forum where people share personal dilemmas. The responses were a mixed bag. Some people were furious on my behalf, calling my mom manipulative and accusing Emily of cowardice. Others said I should try to see it from their perspective, that my mom had acted out of love and Emily had been a scared teenager. Reading through the replies was overwhelming. For every person who said I was justified in cutting them off, another said I should work toward forgiveness. The split opinions mirrored the battle in my own mind. I wanted someone to tell me what to do, to give me the right answer. But the more I searched for clarity, the more I realized there wasn't one. This was my mess to figure out, and no one could tell me how to navigate it but me. After weeks of wrestling with my emotions, I started to wonder if forgiveness was even possible. Not just for them, but for me. The anger, the betrayal, the confusion. They were exhausting. Every day felt like I was dragging a weight around, and I didn't know how much longer I could carry it. But forgiveness? That felt like a mountain I wasn't sure I could climb. I thought about Emily first. She was young when this all started, just a scared teenager thrust into a situation no one should have to face alone. She made mistakes, yes, but did she even have a real choice? My mom had always been the authority figure, the one who made the rules. Could I really blame Emily for going along with her plan? On the other hand, Emily had years to tell me the truth. Years where she could have come clean but didn't. She let me grow up believing a lie. Was her fear enough of an excuse? Then there was my mom. She had taken on the role of caregiver, protector, provider, but at what cost? Her decisions shaped my entire identity, and the weight of her lies left scars I wasn't sure would ever heal. Still, a small voice in the back of my mind reminded me of her sacrifices. She did give me a stable life, opportunities, and unconditional love. Or at least what I thought was unconditional. Did that outweigh the deception? Forgiveness felt like surrender. Like saying what they did was okay, when it wasn't. But holding on to the anger wasn't helping me either. It was eating away at me, making it impossible to move forward. I started asking myself what forgiveness would even look like. Could I rebuild a relationship with them, knowing what I knew now? Could I ever truly trust them again? The questions felt endless, and the answers were nowhere in sight. All I knew was that forgiveness, if it came, wouldn't be for them. It would have to be for me, a way to let go of the pain and finally start healing. But I wasn't sure if I was ready to take that step. Not yet. Eventually, I knew I couldn't avoid them forever. If I wanted any sort of closure, I had to face them, both of them. I decided to meet with my mom and Emily together, hoping that by putting everything out in the open, I could finally get some clarity. We met at my mom's house, the place where I had grown up. Walking through the door felt surreal, like I was stepping into a museum of memories that no longer belonged to me. Emily was already there, sitting on the couch with her hands folded tightly in her lap. My mom stood by the window, her arms crossed and her face unreadable. I sat down, and for a moment, no one said anything. The silence was suffocating. Finally, I took a deep breath and spoke. "I need you both to explain," I said, my voice trembling. "I need to know why you thought it was okay to lie to me for my entire life." Emily glanced at my mom, as if asking for permission to speak first. When she finally did, her voice was shaky. "I didn't know how to fight her," she admitted. "I was scared, and I trusted that she knew what was best. But I hate myself for going along with it. I hate that I let it go on for so long." My mom's response was colder. "I don't regret what I did," she said firmly. "I made a choice to give you a better life. You may not like it, but I did what I thought was right." Her words reignited the anger I'd been trying to suppress. "How can you say that?" I asked, my voice rising. "You didn't just lie. You took away my right to know who I really am." The conversation quickly became heated. Emily tried to mediate, her voice breaking as she begged us to stop fighting. "I know we messed up," she said through tears. "But I'm begging you to give us a chance to fix this." I sat back, exhausted and overwhelmed. Their explanations didn't feel like enough, but they were all I was going to get. As I looked at them, one defiant, the other pleading, I realized that moving forward was going to be more complicated than I ever imagined. After that confrontation, I walked away feeling both drained and strangely clearer about what I needed. It became obvious that my relationship with them, both Emily and my mom, couldn't go back to what it was before. Too much had changed. For so long, my family had been the cornerstone of my identity. My mom was my hero, and Emily was the fun, carefree sister who brightened my childhood. But now, I had to reevaluate everything. The love I thought was unconditional came with secrets, and the bonds I thought were unbreakable felt fragile. I started to question what family really meant. Was it about shared blood? Shared experiences? Trust? Could I still call them my family when I felt so betrayed? Emily, for all her flaws, seemed genuinely remorseful. She had been a scared teenager, manipulated by a mother who wielded authority like a shield. She wanted a relationship with me, not as the sister she once pretended to be, but as the mother she wished she could have been all along. My mom, on the other hand, seemed more interested in justifying her actions than repairing the damage. Her love, as unconditional as it had once seemed, now felt transactional, tied to the sacrifices she made and the gratitude she expected in return. I realized that family wasn't about who raised me or who shared my DNA. It was about who was willing to show up for me now, in the aftermath of this mess. Who was willing to listen, to apologize, to rebuild trust, brick by painstaking brick. For the first time in my life, I understood that I had a choice in what kind of family I wanted. I didn't have to blindly accept the roles they had played or continue to play. I could set boundaries. I could decide what I needed from them and what I was no longer willing to give. It was a painful realization, but an empowering one too. My family might have been built on lies, but it didn't have to stay that way. I could redefine it on my own terms. After weeks of reflection, I came to a decision that felt both inevitable and terrifying. I needed distance, real distance from my mom. I didn't make the choice lightly, but every time I thought about her response to all of this, the same words echoed in my mind. I don't regret what I did. Her refusal to acknowledge the harm she'd caused left no room for reconciliation. How could I rebuild a relationship with someone who couldn't even admit they'd hurt me? Every interaction with her felt like walking into a wall of defensiveness and guilt tripping. I wrote her a letter because I couldn't handle the confrontation of saying it in person. In it, I explained how I felt, how much her choices had hurt me, and how I needed space to figure out who I was outside of the lies. I told her I wasn't cutting her off forever, but for now, I couldn't continue pretending everything was fine. Sending the letter felt like releasing a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. But it also came with a sense of loss. My mom had been my rock for so long, and now I was walking away from her, unsure if I'd ever truly come back. With Emily, things were more complicated. I didn't completely cut her out, but I told her I needed time. She understood, or at least she tried to. She said she'd wait, that she'd do whatever it took to earn my trust again. It wasn't easy. Letting go of the version of my family I'd grown up with felt like mourning a death. But I knew this was the only way to start healing. Sometimes love isn't enough to repair what's broken. Sometimes you have to step away to protect yourself. And that's exactly what I chose to do. So here I am, standing in the wreckage of my family's secrets, wondering where to go from here. The people I trusted most, the people who shaped my entire identity, hid the truth from me for over 2 decades. And now that I know, I can't unknow it. Cutting off my mom, or my grandmother, felt necessary. She raised me, yes, but she also made decisions for me that I never consented to. Choices that rewrote the very foundation of who I thought I was. And even now, she refuses to see how much she's hurt me. It feels like she's more focused on defending herself than helping me heal. Emily, on the other hand, is trying. She wants to build a relationship with me, not as my sister, but as my biological mother. Part of me admires her courage for finally telling me the truth, but another part of me can't ignore the years of silence. She let the lie go on, even when she knew it was wrong. How do I reconcile those two sides of her? The scared teenager who felt powerless, and the adult who could have spoken up but didn't. I've spent so much time trying to make sense of their actions, trying to find the balance between empathy and anger. But what about me? What about the life I've lived believing in something that wasn't real? Do their intentions matter if the outcome left me feeling betrayed and broken? I've started rebuilding, little by little, figuring out who I am outside of the story they created for me. But it's a slow process, and some days, it feels impossible. Now, I turn to you. Was I wrong to cut off my mom? Should I have given her more credit for the sacrifices she made, even if they came with lies? And what about Emily? Am I being too hard on her, or does she deserve my anger for staying silent all these years? I've asked myself these questions 100 times and I still don't know the answers. Maybe you can help me see what I can't. Am I wrong?